Welcome to Lyme Time. I'm Allie from the Tick Chicks. We are all more than Lyme disease and chronic illness, and together we stand with you to overcome and rise. I'll bring you closer to the experts in cutting-edge treatments and even a few unexpected ways of healing. I'll ask the questions you want answers to regarding Lyme disease and successful ways of getting you closer to 100%. We are in this together and will not be defined by Lyme. Today's guest is Dr. Lee Cowden, who is an internationally known doctor for practicing and teaching integrative medicine. He is skilled in evaluative kinesiology, homeopathy, orthomolecular and herbal therapies, reflexology, neural therapy, and electro-acupressure, as well as fixed magnetic, electromagnetic, and detoxification techniques. A U.S. board-certified cardiologist, internist, and clinical nutritionist, Dr. Cowden now teaches full-time. He's contributed to many health books over the years and is co-author of the books, Foods That Fit a Unique You, Create a Toxin-Free Body and Home Starting Today, BioEnergetic Tools for Wellness, An Alternative Medicine Definitive Guide to Cancer, and Cancer Diagnosis, What to Do Next. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cowden. We are so happy to have you here today.
Yes, thank you for your invitation.
I'm so happy to have you here because there are many experts in the field of Lyme disease, but I feel as though you are part of the original gangster tribe. You have been around it for so long. You know so much, and you've always been open to new ideas and new discoveries along the way. And I'm just so excited to pick your brain a little bit. And I know everybody's excited to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to jump right in. It's hard to know where to start. And just so our viewers out there know that Dr. Cowden really does not do a lot of interviews these days. So I'm just very honored to have him here. So I'd like to jump right in on a hot topic that's very, everybody, I get more requests and questions about the vaccine right now for Lyme patients and also chronically ill patients. And they're very scared. They don't know if they should get the vaccine or not the vaccine for, and I'm speaking about COVID, of course. So what do you recommend to your Lyme patients or chronic illness patients?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say that if a person makes a decision out of fear, it's usually the wrong decision. So the first thing they need to do is get out of the fear and then gather information. And then if they have a belief in God or a higher being, go to God in prayer and say, okay, God, I've gathered the information together. What part of this is truth for me? What part of this makes sense for me? What should I do? And so don't let some doctor dictate to you what you do. Don't let some governor of a state dictate to you what you should do, or an employer what you should do. But try to get informed consent and try to make your decision based on what you hear from the Creator.
That's very good advice. That's
Yeah.
very good advice. What about from a medical standpoint? Once you've cleared all those boxes, what should people know about moving forward?
Yeah. Well, people think that they need to get the vaccine in order to be protected against COVID, but that's just a bold-faced lie. The vaccines that are presently on the market, and it's disputable whether you should even call those vaccines because they're not like any vaccines that's ever been made before. But those injectables are to decrease the magnitude of the symptoms in the patient that gets the illness. It doesn't keep you from getting the illness. It doesn't keep you from spreading the illness to someone else. It doesn't even keep you from dying. As a matter of fact, we know that a lot of people that are getting the vaccine are now dying prematurely, and that's of grave concern. And it's one thing to die if you have a relationship with God and know where you're going after you leave this planet, but it's another thing altogether to not die and end up with some incapacitating illness. I've seen some videos of people that were injected with a vaccine that have no control over their nervous system anymore. They're jerking and seizuring, tremoring all the time. And that's no way to live. That's an existence. So if they made that decision out of fear, then it was a bad decision. We know that there's ways to prevent this quote pandemic other than vaccination. The powers to be don't want you to know that, but there are ways. My good friend Leanne Keneally has a cancer clinic in Southern California. And so they see a lot of chronic illness patients as well, but it's about 55 or 60% of all their patients are chronic cancer patients that have failed chemotherapy, failed radiation therapy, have almost zero immune system left. And they can't get into her clinic immediately. And she's instructed the receptionist who schedules their appointment to tell them to clean up their diet, eat only whole and live foods. Don't eat dead foods that you gather from the middle of the store, and to drink water every 15 minutes all day long, and to take 5 supplemental nutrients: magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D3, and iodine. And so the patients do that. And between March 1st and the end of December, they, just based on statistics, they expected to see in their clinic at least 20 deaths from COVID and several hundred cases from COVID, because in that period of time, they saw about 36,000 patients. And so that's no small study. It was not published as a study, but it's still a study nonetheless. And during that time, they saw no deaths, not one, and they saw only one patient that required intravenous infusion of vitamin C to get over it in 24 hours. So if that's the case, then why the heck are we looking at vaccines that could cause disability or death when we could prevent it with 5 supplemental nutrients and a change in cleaning up the diet and taking some water every 15 minutes throughout the day? That seems like a lot more logical and simpler approach to use.
Sure. And what about those that are the elderly, in terms of them, that they might not be able to survive the actual virus itself? Would they be a better candidate than somebody like myself who might survive it very easily?
In those patients that I just mentioned, the 36,000 patients, a lot of them were in their 70s and 80s.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So
Well, we don't hear a lot about those kinds of things on the media, do we, these days?
No, the powers to be are doing everything they can to keep what I just said from getting to the ears of the public, because the narrative is all about selling vaccines. Now, a lot of people don't even know the word homeoprophylaxis, but that's another way to prevent illness. Homeopathy has been used since the late 1700s, almost exactly the same time when the first vaccine was made. And in my computer, I have 5,000 peer-reviewed articles from the literature showing the benefits of homeopathy. So it's not a little studied subject. It's a hugely studied subject. And one of my friends in Australia, Isaac Golden, published an article in May of 2019 in a peer-reviewed journal called the American Journal of Homeopathic Medicine. And that article that he published was large-scale homeoprophylaxis studies. And in that large study that he published, there was 250 million patient years. So we're not talking about a little study. 250 million patient years, preventing 8 different potentially fatal infectious illnesses. Okay, most of them less fatal than much more fatal than COVID. Okay, so in that study, they found that there were no significant long-term adverse effects from using the homeopathy. And they found that the average reduction in illness was 90%.
Incredible.
Compared to people that did not get homeoprophylaxis for those infectious illnesses. In the process of writing that article, Dr. Golden became very knowledgeable about what they were doing in Cuba, and developed a friendship with the doctors in Cuba. In March of 2020, the Cuban government, along with a bunch of the doctors that knew homeopathy, started a study. They put 5 million patients in Cuba on homeoprophylaxis, and they compared those 5 million patients to 6.3 million Cuban citizens who did not get the homeoprophylaxis. And they found that the homeoprophylaxis reduced COVID by 94%. Okay.
Right.
With no long-term adverse effects, no deaths from the treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that says a lot right there. And our bodies know what to do. Sometimes they need a little help through some invaders, but it seems like they react a little more easily to something they recognize, for lack of better terms.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move on to I know your basic philosophy is one of a natural approach in preventing disease, like you just said. And you have been quoted as saying, if you take care of your body, it will take care of you. Tell our listeners, if you will, how you came full circle from a cardiologist and internist to now incorporating homeopathic and energetic medicine for maintaining states of wellness.
That started all very early. I was living in and going to college in West Texas, which is arid and dry, and I got accepted to medical school in Houston in 1975, and I moved down there, and I was not used to the high humidity and the grass and the mold and the weeds and the trees and the pollens and the fungi and everything else that was in the air. And soon after I moved there, I developed allergic rhinitis, then allergic sinusitis, then infective sinusitis, then bronchitis, then pneumonia. And I got so ill, I couldn't even attend classes. And I had gone to the chairman of 3 different medical school departments to, why did that? To go, I went to the chairman of 3 different medical school departments to get help, and I followed their advice explicitly, took their drugs that they recommended, and got progressively worse. And thank goodness my wife's grandmother came to visit us in Houston. Now, she was a school teacher and a self-taught nutritionist, not a doctor. And she saw what I was going through, and she had pity on me. So she took me to the health food store and got me on some vitamins, minerals, and herbs, and I got well in about a month.
Mm.
And I thought, oh my goodness, I need to learn what this woman knows, and I need to take with a grain of salt everything I learned in the training institution after this. So after that, anytime I had extra time to read something, I didn't read medical textbooks. I read books on nutrition, books on herbs, books on fixed magnetic therapies, pulse magnetic therapies, and on and on. So by the time I finished my formal training 9 years later, I
Wow.
was pretty skilled.
So really right out of the gates, and largely due because you faced it yourself and you were
Right.
in a medical crisis yourself and learned firsthand how to heal that way. And perhaps many of our allopathic doctors haven't faced certain things. And I'm not, I'm certainly not pointing the fingers or comparing. I'm just saying that sometimes we all learn to be experts only by going through certain things ourselves.
Yeah, we call it the University of OJT, on-the-job training.
That's right. I'm a
Okay.
graduate.
Yeah, and there's lots of allopathic doctors that are good-hearted doctors, well-intentioned doctors, but they just haven't had the other experience. They don't have that side of the equation, so they don't even know to think about that.
Yeah.
The medical school process should be about educating, but it's really about brainwashing. And so it's about brainwashing that there's only a few acceptable treatment modalities, pharmaceutical medications, surgical treatments, radiation therapy, and so on. Anything else besides that is not acceptable. But it just isn't so. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of research worldwide on the effectiveness of integrative medicine.
Well, we're happy that you decided to take that path. Almost everybody listening today who has Lyme disease has been offered antibiotics at some point in their journey. Do you recommend them? And if not, why? And if so, and how and what does the course look like? I'm not sure. I'm unclear if you would recommend them at any point to any person facing Lyme disease.
Uh, I think there's occasionally an indication for using antibiotics, but it's not very often. Um, in 2003, we did a little pilot study in Dallas to see what we could do for patients that had failed antibiotic therapy. So we had, uh, we had patients in our study that were, uh, had been already treated for several months, and sometimes more than a year for Lyme disease using antibiotic therapy, and were still ill. So in that study, we put patients on an all-natural treatment program, and we followed them for 18 weeks. By the 10th week, there was about a 70% improvement in the treatment group and about a 5% improvement in the control group. And by the 18th week, there was a 90% improvement in the treatment group and a 5% improvement in the control group. So we saw with a small number of patients, it was about 20 patients in each group, that 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 there was clearly a ability to get people well without antibiotics. Okay, because the treatment group received no antibiotics. They only received, herbal therapies and homeopathic therapies and other natural therapies. So, the goal wasn't to try and determine is there one magic bullet that can resolve Lyme disease. The goal was to determine is there any combination of things that we can do that will help these patients that have been given up on by allopathic medicine. After that, Dr. Horowitz in New York called me up and said, Dr. Cowden, I hear you had some success with chronic Lyme patients. He says, I've got 5,000 Lyme patients in my practice, and about 500 are doing very poorly. Do you have any ideas? And
Mm.
so I sent him by email a written empiric protocol using all natural treatments and said, try this, see what you get. So we put about 100 patients on that protocol, and in 6 months' time, 70% were markedly improved. And he called me really excited. He said, 70% improved, and I'm going to present it at the International Lyme Associated Disease Conference this year. I said, good. It's good for them, but what about for the 30%? What are you going to do about them? And he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, well, if you gather, about a dozen of them together, I'll come to your office and evaluate all of them and see if there's something else that we can do for them. He said, okay. So we did that. And I found those that had failed this empiric program had a lot of reasons why they would have been expected to fail. Most of them were not drinking water. They were drinking sodas and coffee and calling that hydration. They were eating a lot of sugar. So they were, feeding the bad bugs. Many of them had a mouthful of mercury amalgams, which was, damaging their immune system and damaging their neurological system. Many of them had mold or fungus in their house or their workplace. Most of them were not working. Most of them were disabled. Uh, and uh, and then there were a few patients that had resistant organisms and a few other things. So I redesigned the program. I said, well, try this. And so he tried that on another 100 patients or so and found that it worked in 85%. So there's still 15% that are not helped by that all natural program empirically. If you do the program guided by energetic testing, electrodermal screening or skilled kinesiology, then you can get the numbers up to at least 90, maybe even 95% success rate. But there's still some that fail, and those are the ones that you think about, antibiotic therapy. And just in the last year, there's been some excellent articles in the peer-reviewed literature about antibiotic therapies. One of the articles was looking at the combination for Bartonella. They were looking at the combination of methylene blue and rifampin or azithromycin. And some doctors use azithromycin. Very few use rifampin, and almost none use methylene blue. Methylene blue is used for methemoglobinemia and a few other conditions, but it works excellently, to get rid of the Bartonella. There's another article in the peer-reviewed literature looking at pharmaceutical treatment for Borrelia, and what they found in that study is that fluconazole, which is an antifungal agent, diflucan, plus methylene blue and or artemisinin, which is a highly purified extract of the sweet wormwood from China, is effective treatment and gets rid of what they call the persister Borrelia in 7 days. So that's pretty impressive results.
That really is.
Yeah.
And so most people listening out there that are considering themselves part of the 15%, would you recommend they go to a naturopathic or homeopathic doctor in order to have access to these alternatives?
Well, yeah, if they're going to include the artemisinin, most allopathic doctors won't use artemisinin, even though it is the most widely accepted treatment for malaria in Africa, and even though the doctor that developed the artemisinin in China got the Nobel Prize for saving millions of lives with the artemisinin, most doctors don't know about it and won't use it. And a lot of doctors won't use the methylene blue because they're not familiar with it. It's not known as an antibiotic. So you got that challenge. But integrative doctors are willing to look at the literature and follow the literature. Even though it's not something that they were taught in medical school.
Sure. Well, we'll hope that we can get our hands on some of those things in the near future, and that they become more readily available. It's quite a maze or a labyrinth, really, of just hits and misses for a lot of people. But I really appreciate you telling me about really what can be offered to those 15%. If they really decide to dive in and try to get their hands on some of those things. Some very respected doctors out there who also contracted chronic illness of one type or another follow your protocol. It's the very famous protocol, one of the top probably handfuls of all the protocols out there. And so for those that don't know your protocol, can you tell them a little bit about what it entails?
Yes, it's right now it's 14 different products that the patients take on a very precise schedule. There are written out schedules that you can print out and follow. A 9-month program is written out on that you can it's in PDF form, so you can print it out. And you take these products in a cyclical fashion. What I learned in treating patients back in 2003 and 4 and 5 was that the patients had most of them had pleomorphic forms, especially the Borrelia. Pleomorphic form is not remaining. The Borrelia doesn't remain in a spirochetal form or a form that looks like a corkscrew. But when they get exposed to certain treatments, herbals or pharmaceutical antibiotics, they transform into a little granule, a little round object, a round body. And those round bodies can persist unaffected by herbals or antibiotics for days, weeks, months, or years until you finally stop using those treatments. So this 9-month protocol that you can find, the program, is using the treatments for basically 12 and a half days on one combination of antimicrobial herbals, and then off for 36 hours to give the hiding forms a chance to transform back into the invasive form, the spirochetal form in the case of Borrelia. And then you start another treatment regimen of antimicrobial herbals, a different one than the one that you just got off of, and you pound them again for 12 and a half days, and then you come off for 36 hours, and then you put them on a third antimicrobial combination and pound them again for 12 and a half days. That cyclical process where you do 3 different regimens, 12 and a half on, 36 off, a different 12 and a half on, 36 off, and a third 12 and a half on and 36 off. And you keep doing that process for enough months, you finally knock down enough of the bugs for the immune system to finally get ahead. Borrelia and Bartonella both suppress the immune system pretty severely, and until you knock the bugs down enough, the immune system doesn't ever kick in enough to help the person get well. But when you knock the bugs down enough, finally the immune system gets ahead of the bugs and can stay ahead of the bugs until the patient gets an unexpected stress, like a major illness, a flu-like illness, let's say, or a motor vehicle accident, or a death of a loved one, or a loss of a job, or something else that really stresses their body in a major way. In that case, if they've been off of the support program for weeks, months, or years, they would be wise to immediately go back on the support program before their immune system takes another major hit. And that way they can keep the bugs from growing back and not have to stay on treatment for very long. But we have lots of patients that have gone through the support program anywhere from 6 to 12 months that are now completely off of all the antimicrobial herbals and remaining well, months and even years later. So a lot of times doctors think, well, if I just kill enough bugs, the patient will get well. But that's really not so. Antoine Béchamp was a contemporary of Louis Pasteur, Bechamp. And Antoine Béchamp figured out that the environment inside the body is what allows the bugs to grow. The bugs are already there, but they grow fast and grow in numbers whenever the body becomes too toxic. The sulfa drugs bind to the sulfation pathway enzymes and prevent the sulfation pathway enzymes from being able to detoxify the body. So if your sulfation pathway enzymes are toxic enough, then there's no way for the body to detoxify itself. So you have to get rid of the sulfa drugs first, and then finally the body can start detoxifying itself.
Sounds like
So
a very easy to follow program and very easy to use for anybody out there, and probably pretty
yeah,
affordable too, considering the alternative fancy
yeah,
treatment.
yeah. It's not cheap. It's just a couple $100 a month. But a lot of people that go on it have already spent $50,000 to $100,000 before they go on it, and
Yeah.
then they get well in 6 to 12 months and say, my goodness, I spent $2,000 here. I wish I'd have known about this about 10 years ago.
What would you say is a normal journey on your protocol with regard to the reactions?
Well, yeah, the protocol is designed to try to minimize the reactions. It says on day one, start drinking 2 ounces of water every 15 minutes all day long while awake. And that helps detoxify, the kidneys, the urinary bladder, the liver, even, and the lymphatic system, the ground matrix. But in the first 3 days of the program, the patient's not taking any antimicrobial agents. And reactions develop because the carcasses of the dying bugs pile up in the tissues, in addition to the heavy metals and the radioactive elements and the pesticides and herbicides and solvents and antibiotics and other pharmaceutical drugs. And it's the combination of all of those that creates a reaction. But if you lower the load for the first 3 days before you start any antimicrobial agent, then you're less likely to get that. Also, when the antimicrobial agents are started, you don't start with full dose, you start with 1 drop of these alcoholic herbal tinctures. And you're not going to get much of a reaction with 1 drop. Most people won't anyway.
Mhm.
Most doctors that give their patients antibiotics, the patient gets a reaction, they say, well, stop the treatment for 3 days and hopefully it will go away in that time. But in that time, the microbes regrew and you're no further along than you were.
Mhm.
So it's a lot better to do a little at a time rather than too much at once.
Sure. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit here. I want to discuss emotional medicine, as I like to call it. And basically, that being the purging of emotional blocks in our bodies in order to release a disease. And this is kind of out there for a lot of our listeners, and a new maybe a new reality of medicine that they had never considered before. Can you explain why blocked emotional energy can cause disease in specific areas of the body and what to do about that?
Yeah, well, actually, the Chinese figured out about 2,000 years ago that specific emotions are trapped in specific locations. So anger and things that are also related to anger, frustration, rage, bitterness, resentment, all those emotions, which are varying forms of anger, are trapped in the liver and the gallbladder and the bile ducts. And if a person has unresolved anger, the Chinese figured out that they're going to accumulate physical toxins in their liver, gallbladder, and bile ducts until they get the anger out.
Mhm.
So if you don't want to continue walking around with a liver, gallbladder, and bile duct full of toxins, you want to get rid of the anger so that you can do that. So the best way to get rid of the anger is to go by yourself someplace where you're not going to be interrupted. You're not going to disturb anybody else. You close your eyes, you visualize the face of a person that caused a lot of anger in you. And once you can see their face well with your closed, through your closed eyelids, you start shouting at them as if they're there. Well, obviously they're not there, but it's a visualization shouting process that helps you to get rid of enough of the deep-rooted anger, frustration, and other related emotions, so that you can get to the point where you can forgive them. If the anger is an emotion, unforgiveness is a spiritual issue. Both can cause physical disease in the body. So you want to get rid of the anger first so that you can release the unforgiveness, so that you can get rid of both the anger, the emotion, and the spiritual issue at the same time. Once you finish, shouting at the first person, though, you don't go to forgiving them. You go to shouting at the second person, then the third and the fourth and the fifth, and all the way up to yourself and your parents, because the greatest amount of anger, unresolved anger, frustration will be towards ourselves and towards our parents. And once you shouted at all of those, then you can start forgiving in reverse order. So forgive, yourself first, forgive your parents next, forgive your siblings next, and then other close relatives, and then distant relatives, and then the people that you're not related to, all the way back to the first person that you shouted at. And if you're a praying person, at the end of all that forgiving process, you can say, God, Creator, I'm sorry for the anger, frustration I've held on to towards myself and all these others. Please forgive me for that. And so you're working at this problem on multiple levels at the same time, with one session that costs you nothing. You don't have to have a psychiatrist or psychologist to hold your hand through the process. If people will release the fear and the sadness and the other things as they're emoting the anger, then they get a whole lot of mileage from that. So if you feel like you got to stop and cry, stop and cry. If you got to feel like you got to stop and tremble for a bit, then you do that. But anyway, that's a really good start on getting rid of some of the emotions. And the emotion of fear is trapped into the urinary bladder and the kidneys, according to Chinese tradition. And as long as you have fear, which a lot of people do nowadays, you're going to impair your kidney function, urinary bladder function, and the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys, because they're also influenced by fear. And if the adrenal glands get toxic enough, then they can't help you to make it through the next stress. It's the adrenal glands that help us to survive stressful events.
Have you written a book on this specific topic?
No, but I've done a few courses on it on acimconnect.com.
Okay.
And so there's that's something maybe I'll get around to.
There's another book for you. Well, I'm a big believer in this, and it's very hard for me, I'm not a doctor, so it's very hard for me to try to help people kind of come to the other side and understanding. Healing is just such a huge, colossal undertaking that you have to consider all parts of your being. And of course, we all start out with the physical healing element of our bodies, because that's what's in acute pain. But really, it's just kind of your body's trying to tell you something's wrong and off kilter and out of whack. So yes, we can help it along that way, but eventually, when we are feeling strong enough, and when I feel when people hit their stride in terms of taking control of their physical health, and the mental health is the other 50% of it. And so I really appreciate you giving that credit and speaking to people about it, because there's nothing, and that's a very cheap way to get medicine. To be honest with you, you can just scream into your pillow and really just continue to do that on your own. Of course,
there's there's a variety of techniques to get rid of the deep buried subconscious emotions. The emotions that have the greatest impact on us are those that we accumulate while we're in the womb for 9 months. And obviously, all of those are completely subconscious. We're not aware of them. So we're born with a pretty big load of subconscious emotions. And, there's ways to get at that even, through, for example, emotion code, or through evox therapy, or, other techniques.
Rebirthing, which is what I did.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did a whole visualization
Yeah.
on that and processing, and you'd be surprised what deep-seated stuff actually comes out from long ago, you guys. I definitely don't
Mhm.
I recommend this to everyone. If you can get to a place where you can try this, I'm a big believer in that. Okay.
Yeah. There's one more thing. If people might not be able to connect the dots here, but what I, for example, cardiomyopathy, which is an enlargement of the heart and a loss of muscular function of the heart, which results in eventually congestive heart failure and death. Cardiomyopathy comes predominantly from brokenheartedness, and occasionally other similar related emotions, but brokenheartedness is the root. And so energetically, you can test a patient that has cardiomyopathy and find physical toxins in their heart, and do a urine test that measures heavy metals, and see heavy metals not coming out. And then you can do an emotion release session about the brokenheartedness, and then collect another urine sample and see the metals coming out in the urine without doing anything on a physical level.
Incredible.
And then muscle test again and find that there's no longer weakness in the heart. And then soon after that, the repeat echocardiogram shows that the congestive heart failure is gone, the cardiomyopathy is resolving, and patients become well. So I've treated a few dozen patients with cardiomyopathy over the years that way. And these are patients that were on the heart transplant list, and every one of them avoided the heart transplant.
Wow. Wow. Incredible work. I'm so impressed. Um, I'm also impressed with this book in particular. That would be the book BioEnergetic Tools for Wellness. And you go into detail about herbs, pulse electromagnetic field therapy, Rife machines, saunas, TRM therapy for pain, cold laser therapy, acupuncture, biofeedback, emotional freedom technique, biomat, reflexology, and clay therapy, just to name a few. And these are all, a lot of them are listed on my website as well. In terms of when people kind of go through the antibiotic stages, and then these are also available to them at any time. Is there one of these therapies that work better than the others, or is it just a matter of what each body responds to individually? And do you think there's a generalized stigma from the allopathic medical community with these therapies, and why would that be?
Again, it's usually lack of knowledge on part of the allopathic doctors, that they will not accept any of these therapies, or almost any of these therapies. In allopathic medicine, we use an electrocardiogram to measure the electricity coming from the heart. We use an encephalogram, electroencephalogram, EEG, to measure the electricity coming from the brain. We use a myogram to measure the electricity coming from the muscles, but it's forbidden to use any other type of electrical or magnetic energies in the human body other than those few. Okay, because they're not taught in U.S. medical schools. Uh, the what I say is, a lot of allopathic doctors suffer from the NIH syndrome, the not invented here syndrome.
Okay.
Okay, so if something was developed in China, then they disregard it in faith. But a doctor from Cornell University 35 years ago decided he was going to write a book about Chinese medicine, and some colleagues said, "Well, how long do you think that'll take?" He said, "A couple of years." Well, 30 years later, he finished the book, and he concluded in his book that everything that we thought that we discovered in the United States was discovered in China anywhere from 50 to 2,000 years before we discovered it. Everything, not some things, everything.
Hmm.
Okay. So it's snobbish on our part to think that we have all the answers. And the therapies that are appropriate for a patient, for one patient, may not be the best therapy for another patient. So we need to individualize patients. Unfortunately, allopathic medicine tends to cookbook patients. You know,
Mhm.
it's a, what is your symptom? Oh, well, that's a drug deficiency. This specific drug deficiency. So they write your prescription for that specific drug.
Mhm.
But what would be better is to identify the underlying causes of the disease, treat all of the underlying causes, whether they're mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, quantum physical, and then watch the disease just go away because you got rid of all the obstacles to healing.
Mhm.
That's a lot more logical.
Yeah, I'm definitely to that stage, and I feel like, you know, people listening are in all different stages of chronic illness, acute, the the in between stage, and then on the other side, when you can actually start seeing the gifts in many things that you've gone through
Hmm.
medically.
Yeah,
And so I agree. It's too bad that we can't just be taught that by our very first doctor that we go to when we're having some neurological issues, that wouldn't be part of the pamphlet, that a Lyme disease test wouldn't be part of the top 7 that they test for. We've all wasted years and years
yeah,
with different judgments.
yeah.
With the current pandemic of 2020, it feels like many people are becoming aware of their immune system all of a sudden, and how well it would hold up against a foreign virus or disease. Do you think integrative medicine is the future? And how far have we progressed in the United States over the last 20, 30 years with regard to that type of mentality?
It's been said that changes develop in medicine one death at a time. It's a sad commentary, but what that person that said that was referring to is the death of the old professors at the medical school and universities. When they die off, then new ideas can come in.
That's good.
Okay, so uh, the many of the things that are considered mainstream in allopathic medicine now developed in integrative medicine 20 and 30 years ago. So most of the things that will come into allopathic medicine that are useful tools have been tried and tested in integrative medicine for usually a few decades before they finally make their way into allopathic medicine. And so there's some hope that over time people will get help, but that's slow, waiting for the professors in the university to die. So maybe it's better to start trying to get some of the doctors that are out in the medical community that are thinking about retiring early because they're so disillusioned with the way medicine's gone. Get them to start learning something about integrative medicine and applying what they know for their patients, for the patient's benefit. And over time, more and more of the physician population has some integrative knowledge that can be used to help the patients.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's really still shocking to me out in California how just the mention of Lyme disease too. I've had it with, of course, all my doctors leading up to this, but even more recently, a neurologist that I really trusted, and also who only believes in the ELISA test, and then another one that was an endocrinologist, actually totally went in there unrelated, and I said, could this issue be somehow related to Lyme disease? And I mean, it was almost a chuckle in my face. And so I just was quiet after that. It's really so far out of people's mentality. And that's part of the frustration. I'm actually going to join a force where we talk to our representatives and in about 2 weeks, and try to get a Lyme disease test as part of the top 5. When you go in and you've nothing else is being diagnosed, that
Yeah,
would be one of the top first tests that they do. We'll
yeah,
see how far we can get.
yeah.
Um, And you have, doctor, paved the way for so many on their journey to wellness. It seems like your work is never done, and you keep writing and you keep teaching. And I'm very excited about this, and I know you are. There's a new movie coming out that features you in it called The Monster Inside Me. I want to read just a little paragraph about it. The Monster Inside Me is a documentary that follows a couple who bravely turn the camera on themselves to reveal an intimate and groundbreaking perspective on Lyme disease. They take the viewer on an unforgettable journey researching the truth, lies, and healing behind our modern era's most misunderstood chronic illness affecting more than 150 million people worldwide. And it will be released, I believe, in May of 2021. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why you participated?
Yeah, the key actress in the movie, this is a documentary really. Uh, it was a patient in the practice, and so I gave her some pointers along the way that probably gave her some help to regain her health. Tony Silva, her fiance, now her husband, is a very skilled storyteller, and so he included their story, but not only theirs, but the story of several of the other couples. I call them couples, that were featured in the movie. Sometimes the couple is a parent and a child. Sometimes it's a husband and a wife. Sometimes it's a boyfriend and a girlfriend. But I think one of the take-home messages from the movie was that that there is hope always until you're planted 6 feet under. Probably there's not much hope at that point. But one of the key factors in maintaining the hope is the unconditional love from another human being. And so Tony provided that unconditional love for Frances as she was going through this torment of the Lyme illness. And I wanted people to be able to see that side of it, because doctors sometimes don't see the how this affects individuals and families, but this illness is a illness that devastates families and relationships. A lot of divorces occur. A lot of people commit suicide because they lose their hope and they just don't want to endure this anymore. And it's really tragic when that happens, because I know from my experience that almost everybody can be helped.
Mhm.
And no matter how bad they are, no matter how many doctors they've seen. One of the young men that was in our Lyme pilot study back in 2003 was 35 years old, and he had been to see 50 doctors in the United States, including 2 trips to Mayo Clinic, and he was told, there's nothing that can be done, get used to it. This is your life for the rest of your life. And he's 35 years old. So anyway, during the 18 weeks, he saw marked improvement in his condition, and he became hopeful again. And so as a result of that, he decided to continue the program until he was fully well, which took him about 9 months. At the end of 9 months, he moved from Texas to Arizona, bought a piece of property, built a house with his own hands, then started studying to become a naturopathic doctor. And then after that, he started treating other people that had the same condition that he was suffering from before he became ill.
I mean, life-changing right
Yeah.
there. Some other things that I liked about the movie, I got a little sneak peek actually, but is the fact that that it discusses so much about Lyme rage,
Mm-hmm.
and how it can make some people, not all people, but some people, because it invades the brain, it they feel like they're going crazy because they become unhinged on so many levels and start acting in these fits of rage like they've never acted before in their entire lives. And so that was one thing that I found fascinating. And another thing is the whole autistic factor in for any children with Lyme.
Yeah. a large percentage of children that have autism or labeled with autism actually have unrecognized, untreated Lyme disease. And if you treat those kids, oftentimes they become completely neurotypical again.
Mm.
I had several of them in the practice when I was, seeing a lot of kids. And I remember one little girl, 3 years old, with just complete care case. That she couldn't do anything for herself, and she was most of the time beating her head against the wall because she obviously had so much pain and inflammation in her head. But anyway, started treatment with herbal therapies for her, and in 3 months' time, she was completely neurotypical. Went into a daycare setting, and they said she has autism. We don't see any evidence of that.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. So there's lots of hope for a lot of people out there that think there is no hope, whether it's autism or whether it's other neurodegenerative diseases. Patients with MS, most of them have unrecognized, untreated Lyme disease. We did a little pilot study in Dallas back in 2014 and found that patients that were heading toward MS could be reversed just with herbal therapies and proteolytic enzymes and some magnetic therapy or photonic therapy. I mean, and it only took about 4 to 6 months to do that.
Mhm.
So these are patients that probably would have gone to be full-blown MS patients, wheelchair bound, bed bound, incapacitated, and they were reversible. Uh,
Wow.
same same thing is probably true for Alzheimer's dementia. Dr. Judith McCloskey in Switzerland did autopsies on I think over 100 patients with that died with a label of Alzheimer's dementia, and she found spirochetes in the brains of 90% of them. 90% had
90%.
spirochetes in their brain. 25% were Borrelia. The other 65% were Treponema species, spiral-shaped bacteria that are found in the mouth. So every time you brush your teeth with gum disease, you mobilize some of those spirochetes into the bloodstream, and some of them go into the brain.
Mm. So complicated. And going back to the children with autistic tendencies or all out autism, I get the question a lot about pregnancy and Lyme disease. There are many women who are pregnant and who have Lyme disease who are worried about, I guess, either a flare up during pregnancy, which of course is expected, but also they're nervous about passing it along to their unborn child. Can you enlighten us about your thoughts on that?
Well, it can happen. There's a bit of an immune suppression that happens during pregnancy, so that the mother's body won't reject the fetus that's developing in her womb. Uh, and uh, it, what I've seen is that when the Lyme disease does flare a bit, it doesn't get, in most cases, completely out of control before the woman finally delivers the baby. At that point, we've started patients, the women that just recently delivered, back on natural herbal protocol. Some of those women were breastfeeding, some of them weren't, but it appeared that the children got better also, just because they were breastfeeding, um, if they were breastfeeding. So you know it appears that that at least the herbal program, products that are in the program are tolerated by babies, newborns, through the breast milk. What we don't know is whether those herbal programs are safe and effective during the pregnancy. We don't know if it would have a mutagenic effect on the developing fetus in the womb. So the research still needs to be done to verify that. But in the meantime, women need to, before they get pregnant, get the bugs down, with either the program or something similar. And then once they're in remission, then it's okay to get pregnant, even though they may still have some Lyme-related bugs in their body. Hopefully their immune system will stay strong enough during the pregnancy so that they don't have a bad flare-up. And then after the pregnancy is finished, the baby is delivered, then they can start back on a national treatment program to get rid of the Lyme-related bugs that are in their body or in the bodies of the babies.
Great, great. That's good to hear. And before we wrap it up, I mean, we could speak for hours, I'm sure, but I'd like to know if you have any thoughts that you might want to share with our listeners. They're out there to the tune of 400,000 plus people every year, new cases, and those people will be introduced to Lyme disease. So tell us your final thoughts of wisdom you would like everyone to hear.
Well, I think one of the more important things to maintain is hope. You know, one of my colleagues many years ago said, Dr. Cowden, aren't you giving your patients false hope? And I thought about it for a few moments and I said, no, there's either hope or there's no hope, but there's no such thing as false hope. As long as you're still breathing, as long as you're still, not 6 feet under, there's hope. I've seen patients that were sent home to die by their oncologist and are still alive now 20 and 30 years later, because the first thing that we did was to reinstill hope in them.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the way that you do that is to show them somebody else that was just as bad off as they were that's still alive years later. And that's one of the reasons. The other reason I was so excited to have some role in the the monster inside of me is because I think it helps to restore some hope in people that are losing hope. And the other thing that I think is absolutely essential is unconditional love. The most powerful healing force in the universe is unconditional love, and you know you can see that in the movie between the
Mm-hmm.
between Tony and Francis, but also between several of the other couples that are in that movie. And if you don't have a deep relation, if you're living alone, you don't have a deep relationship with somebody, and you get Lyme disease, then find a friend quickly.
That's right. That's
and,
right.
and,
Or
and
reach out online or
yeah,
something. It's
yeah,
true.
yeah, yeah. A true friend will stick with you through thick and thin. Okay, they'll help you work your way through the Lyme rages and everything else that you're having to deal with. A true friend.
Those are good.
And
That's a good nugget of information to take with us all. I often say some of my best friends I've met on the internet, and I never thought I would say that, but I think if we all came together one day and we would start our conversation on a much deeper level than I would with a lot of people that I see every day.
yeah,
When you meet somebody else going through the same thing, there is hope for each other, and I just want everybody to see that. And the movie is, in the very end, it really depicts what unconditional love looks like. It shows you an example, and he's incredible. And it takes a very special person to ride the journey with somebody else going through this, but it does pay off. And I think it also highlights that caretakers need as much unconditional love in their life
yeah,
from the patient.
yeah, yeah. And I think that it's really important for caretakers to have another source of strength and love and encouragement besides the patient, because sometimes the patient goes for days or weeks in a really negative place in their mind and in their physical body. And if that caretaker has somebody else in their life that they can confide in, get consolation from, then I think it's really helpful I call it getting refueled periodically, so that they can bring that refueling back into the relationship with that Lyme patient.
So important to have that to tap into at any time, even unconditional love for ourselves. I think that's where it all starts. So I hate to end this, but thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today. And I'm honored and I'm thankful and grateful that you've taken time to continue to educate all of us. And are you doing anything virtual right now, or how can people reach you?
Yeah, I do periodic webinars and things like that. I decided it's not such a great idea to be traveling around as much as I used to, for lots of reasons. But the there's periodic webinars, and I'll probably start announcing those on my own personal website, the drleecowden.com. And the other way that people can get educated, though, is to go to the site that I've worked with since 2008, I guess it was, which is acimconnect.com. And acimconnect.com has a couple thousand hours worth of educational material on there. And if a person becomes a free member, then you can search the database and see if there's something there that looks of interest, and then review that. That there are some free archived webinars on there, but there's a small charge for other things that are on there.
That's an amazing resource, and I'm going to put that on our website as well. Thank you again, Dr. Cowden. Much love to you, health and happiness the rest of this year, and I hope that you'll come back and see us again.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing what you do, and just keep it up. I think it's vitally important.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.